Prologue. The promise of destiny. Picture this. It's a cold dawn along the banks of the ancient Tiber River. The morning mist clings to the water like the breath of forgotten gods. A servant clutches a wicker basket to his chest, his hands trembling not from the chill but from the weight of the choice before him. Inside that basket, two infant boys sleep peacefully, unaware that their uncle, King Romulus, has ordered their death. Unaware that the blood of Mars, the god of war, flows through their veins. Unaware that one day, one of them will found the greatest empire the world has ever known, and the other will die by his brother's hand. This is the story of Romulus and Remus, a tale of divine destiny, sibling rivalry, and the violent birth of Rome itself. But be warned, this is no fairy tale. This is a story where gods seduce mortals, where brothers become enemies, and where the price of greatness is written in blood. Chapter 1. Blood on the Throne. Our story begins not with heroes, but with a crime that would echo through the ages. In the ancient city of Alba Longa, nestled in the rolling hills of central Italy, two brothers sat upon neighboring thrones, but only one was meant to rule. Numitor was the rightful king, a just ruler beloved by his people. But his younger brother Romulus burned with envy. He had always lived in his brother's shadow, and shadows can drive men to madness. For years, Romulus had watched from the sidelines as his elder brother received the love and respect that he craved. Every royal decree, every public celebration, every moment of Numitor's reign was like a dagger twisting in Romulus's heart. So, Romulus struck like a serpent in the night. He murdered Numitor's sons, the rightful heirs, and hurled their bodies into the very river that would later save their cousins. The palace ran red with royal blood as Romulus' mercenaries slaughtered anyone who might pose a threat to his rule. But Romulus was cunning. He allowed Numitor to live, knowing that a defeated brother is more useful than a dead one. And Rhea Silvia, Numitor's daughter and the last threat to his throne. He condemned her to become a Vestal virgin, a priestess bound by sacred vows never to marry, never to bear children, never to produce an heir who might challenge his rule. For 40 years it seemed Romulus had won. The usurper king grew fat and comfortable on his stolen throne, believing himself safe from the wrath of gods and men alike. But the gods had other plans. Chapter 2. When Gods Walk Among Mortals. It was during the sacred rituals of spring, as Rhea Silvia performed her duties as a Vestal virgin, that Mars, the god of war himself, descended from Olympus. The goddess Vesta's temple stood in a grove of ancient oaks, where shafts of golden sunlight pierced the canopy like divine arrows. Picture her, beautiful, isolated in her sacred duties. She had accepted her fate with the resignation of the noble-born, dedicating her life to tending the eternal flame that protected Rome. But on this particular morning, as she drew water from the sacred spring for the temple's purification rituals, something extraordinary happened. Mars appeared not as the terrible god of battlefields, wreathed in smoke and gore, but as the most magnificent man she had ever seen. Some say he came as a golden light that wrapped around her like warm honey, speaking in a voice like distant thunder. Others whisper he took the form of a wounded soldier she could not help but aid, his divine nature hidden beneath mortal flesh. What passed between the god and the mortal woman in that grove, we can only imagine. The ancient sources are silent on her consent, but they speak clearly of the consequences. 9 months later, as winter storms lashed Alba Longa with unprecedented fury, Rhea Silvia gave birth to twins, two boys whose cries shook the very foundations of the temple. The moment they drew breath, the omens began. The sacred fire of Vesta, which had burned continuously for centuries, suddenly guttered and went out. The altar trembled as if shaken by an earthquake. The statue of the goddess herself turned her face away in sorrow, tears of marble streaming down her cheeks. For these children were no ordinary babes. They were demigods, sons of Mars, born to reshape the world. But their divine heritage would not save them from the wrath of mortal men. Chapter 3. A Servant's Impossible Choice. When word reached Amulius that his niece had given birth, his rage was volcanic. Here were the heirs he thought he had prevented. Not just any heirs, but sons of a god. The very walls of his palace seemed to whisper of his coming doom. Amulius paced his throne room like a caged beast, his mind racing through the implications. These were not just royal bastards. They were the children of Mars himself. If they lived, they would not only challenge his earthly throne, but would have the backing of the gods themselves. The king summoned his most trusted servant, a man who had served the royal house faithfully for decades. He knelt before his king, awaiting orders that would change his life forever. "Kill them," Amulius commanded, his eyes burning with desperate malice. "Take them to the river and drown them like unwanted kittens. But beware, if you spill the blood of Mars's sons directly, the gods' vengeance will be swift and terrible. Let the river be their executioner, not your hands." The servant accepted the wicker basket that contained the fate of Rome. As he walked toward the door, Amulius called out one final warning. "And if you betray me in this, if you let sentiment cloud your judgment, I will feed you to the dogs piece by piece. These children must die, or we all die with them." The servant took the basket and walked through the darkened streets of Alba Longa. But with each step, his resolve crumbled. He had expected to carry monsters to their doom, but when he looked into the basket, he saw two perfect infants sleeping peacefully despite the cold. One looked up at him with eyes like dark stars, tiny fingers grasping at the air. The other made soft cooing sounds, as if trying to speak. These were not the offspring of evil. They were innocent babes who had committed no crime beyond being born. At the river's edge, the servant faced the choice that would change history. The Tiber rushed past, swollen with spring floods that would make drowning swift and certain. He could obey his king and watch the waters claim these children, earning gold and continued favor. Or he could trust in the gods and let the river decide their fate. With tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, he knelt by the water's edge. "Forgive me," he whispered to the sleeping infants. "I cannot murder you, but I cannot save you either. If you are truly sons of Mars, if the gods have plans for you, then let them preserve you now." He placed the basket gently on the current and whispered a prayer that would echo through the ages. "If you are truly divine, let the river carry you to safety. If not, may the gods forgive me for what I could not do." The Tiber, swollen with spring floods, caught the basket like a mother's arms and carried it downstream, away from death toward destiny. But the river had other plans. Chapter 4. The Wolf Mother's Gift. The basket floated for miles, carried by currents that seemed guided by divine will. It passed beneath stone bridges, around rocky outcroppings, through marshes where herons watched with ancient eyes. The twins slept through it all, as if protected by some invisible spell. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, the basket came to rest against the roots of a sacred fig tree, the Ficus ruminalis, at the base of the Palatine Hill. This was no accident of nature. The tree was sacred to Rumina, the goddess of nursing mothers, and the hill itself was destined to be the heart of the greatest city the world would ever know. The twins' cries echoed through the wilderness, growing stronger as hunger gnawed at their tiny bellies. But no human heard them calling. The shepherds were far away with their flocks, and the hill was considered cursed by the common folk, a place where strange things were said to happen. Something else did hear them, though. From the shadows of the Lupercal cave, a sacred grotto dedicated to the god Faunus in his aspect as Lupercus, the wolf god, emerged a sight that should have meant death. A massive she-wolf, her coat dark as midnight, her yellow eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence. This was no ordinary wolf. She was one of Mars's sacred animals, a creature touched by the divine. As she approached the crying infants, something extraordinary happened. The babies did not cower or scream in terror. They reached toward her with tiny hands, as if recognizing a kindred spirit. The she-wolf lowered her great head and sniffed the children. She smelled their divine heritage, the blood of Mars flowing in their veins. Her maternal instincts, heightened by the god's influence, overcame her predatory nature. Gently, carefully, she lifted each infant in her massive jaws and carried them to the safety of her cave. There, in the dim light filtering through the entrance, she lay down and offered them her milk. The sons of Mars suckled from the teats of a wild beast, drinking in the fierce strength that would make them conquerors. For days, the she-wolf nursed them as if they were her own cubs. When they were hungry, she fed them. When they were cold, she warmed them with her body. When they cried, she licked their faces with her rough tongue until they quieted. A sacred woodpecker, another creature beloved by Mars, made its nest near the cave entrance. Each day it would fly out to gather berries and insects, bringing them back to drop into the mouths of the growing infants. The god was protecting his sons through the very creatures of the wild, preparing them for the savage world they would have to master. But civilization would soon find them. Chapter 5. A Shepherd's Divine Discovery. Faustulus was not just any shepherd. He was the royal herdsman, keeper of the king's flocks, a man who had served the house of Numitor before Amulius's bloody coup. He had witnessed the slaughter of the rightful princes and had kept his mouth shut to save his own life. But the guilt gnawed at him every day. On this particular morning, he was leading his sheep to pasture when he heard strange sounds echoing from the direction of the Lupercal. Not the usual bleating of his flock or the chittering of birds, but something else. Something that made his blood run cold. Following the noise, he discovered a scene that would be carved into 1,000 statues and painted on 1,000 walls. 2 robust baby boys, perhaps 6 months old, playing beneath the belly of a massive she-wolf while a woodpecker perched nearby, standing guard like a divine sentinel. The she-wolf, sensing his approach, raised her head and looked directly into his eyes. For a long moment, man and beast stared at each other. Faustulus felt as if the creature was communicating with him, passing some sacred trust from one guardian to another. Then, as silently as she had come, the she-wolf padded back into the depths of her cave, disappearing into the shadows. The woodpecker gave a final cry and flew away, leaving Faustulus alone with the 2 infants who would change the world. Faustulus gathered the boys in his arms, marveling at their strength and vitality. They were not sickly or weak from their ordeal. They were robust, healthy, and beautiful. When he looked into their eyes, he saw an intelligence that seemed almost godlike, as if they understood more than any infant should. He brought them home to his wife, Acca Larentia, who had long mourned their childlessness. When she saw the babies, her heart opened immediately. "Where did you find them?" she asked, taking one of the boys into her arms. "The she-wolf was nursing them," Faustulus replied, hardly believing his own words. I think they may be the sons of Mars." Acca Larentia nodded slowly. In a world where gods walked among mortals, such things were not impossible. "Then we will raise them as our own," she declared, "and pray to the gods that we prove worthy of such a trust." They named the boys Romulus and Remus, never knowing they held the future emperors of the world in their humble cottage. As the twins grew, their divine heritage became more apparent with each passing day. They were stronger than other children, faster, more intelligent. They could run for hours without tiring, climb trees that other boys wouldn't dare attempt, and solve problems that baffled adults. Other children naturally gravitated toward them, forming groups with the twins as leaders. The boys grew like young gods among the shepherd folk. They organized the village children into bands that roamed the hills, settling disputes with wisdom beyond their years and protecting the weak from bullies. They became known throughout the region as champions of justice, fearless in the face of danger. When cattle thieves plagued the hillside communities, it was Romulus and Remus who tracked them down and recovered the stolen animals. When bandits threatened the shepherds, it was the twins who drove them away with clever tactics and surprising courage. Stories of their brave deeds spread far and wide, carried by merchants and travelers who had witnessed their heroic acts. The names of Romulus and Remus became synonymous with justice and strength throughout the hills around Alba Longa. But blood will tell, and royal blood demands a crown. Chapter 6. The moment truth shattered everything. 18 years passed in the hills above the Tiber. Romulus and Remus had become legends among the hill folk, young men whose very presence inspired others to greatness. They stood taller than other men, moved with the grace of trained warriors, and spoke with the authority of born leaders. But they had no idea who they truly were, until fate intervened. It began with a dispute over cattle between the shepherds of different hills. The herds of several communities had been grazing in the same valleys for generations, but a dry summer had made the grass scarce. Tempers flared as accusations flew about stolen animals and violated boundaries. The conflict escalated when shepherds loyal to King Numitor, the old king still maintained some lands in the northern hills, accused the followers of Romulus and Remus of stealing their prize cattle. The twins, who had built their reputation on returning stolen goods to their rightful owners, were outraged by the accusation. "We are not thieves," Remus declared, his voice carrying the authority of a natural leader. "We are the ones who catch thieves and return what was stolen." But Numitor's shepherds were not convinced. They had been watching the twins for months, suspicious of their obvious prosperity and the loyalty they inspired. In their eyes, no common shepherds could possess such natural authority unless they were hiding something. The argument erupted into violence. In the chaos that followed, Remus found himself surrounded by hostile shepherds who managed to overpower him through sheer numbers. Despite his strength and fighting skill, he was captured and dragged away, bound with ropes like a common criminal. When they brought him before their master, Remus found himself standing in a hall he had never seen before, facing an old man whose weathered face bore the unmistakable stamp of nobility. This was King Numitor, the rightful ruler of Alba Longa, living in exile on his reduced lands. As Numitor looked into the young man's face, his breath caught in his throat. The features were familiar: the noble bearing, the proud set of the jaw, the eyes that burned with inner fire. But most shocking of all, he saw his own eyes looking back at him, and the eyes of his long-lost daughter Rhea Silvia. "What is your name, young man?" Numitor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am Remus," the young man replied proudly, "son of Faustulus the shepherd." "And your mother?" "Acca Laurentia, wife of Faustulus." Numitor's hands began to shake. "Tell me of your birth. Were you born to these parents, or were you found?" Remus's eyes narrowed. "What do you know of my birth, old man?" Before Numitor could answer, commotion erupted outside the hall. Faustulus had arrived, demanding the release of his foster son. The old shepherd had run for miles, his heart pounding with fear and guilt. When he was brought before Numitor, Faustulus fell to his knees, not just from exhaustion but from recognition. This was his former master, the rightful king whom he had served before Amulius's coup. "My lord," Faustulus gasped, "I can explain everything." From beneath his shepherd's cloak, Faustulus drew out the one piece of evidence he had kept hidden for 18 years: the wicker basket. Despite the passage of time, it was still beautiful, crafted from the finest reeds, inlaid with gold, and marked with the royal seal of Alba Longa. "I found them 18 years ago," Faustulus confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "Two infants, being nursed by a she-wolf at the Lupercal cave. I knew they were noble-born from this basket, but I dared not investigate further. The times were too dangerous. Numitor took the basket with trembling hands, recognizing it immediately. It was the same basket that had belonged to his daughter, passed down through generations of royal women. "Great Jupiter," Numitor whispered, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "You are my grandsons. You are the sons of Rhea Silvia, the children who were supposed to die on the river." The words hit Remus like a thunderbolt from heaven. He wasn't a shepherd's son. He was a prince, heir to the throne of Alba Longa. The blood of kings flowed in his veins, and the blood of Mars himself. When Romulus arrived with a rescue party, he found his brother in deep conversation with their newly discovered grandfather. The truth was quickly explained, and both twins felt their world shift beneath their feet. They were not common shepherds. They were the rightful heirs to the throne that their uncle had stolen. They were princes of the blood, sons of a god, destined for greatness. And they wanted their birthright back. Chapter 7. The Tyrant's Reckoning. The revelation of their true heritage set the twins' blood on fire. For 18 years they had wondered about their origins, felt the pull of something greater than a shepherd's life. Now they knew why. They were born to rule. What followed was not a reckless charge driven by emotion, but a carefully planned campaign worthy of future emperors. Romulus and Remus spent weeks gathering intelligence, mapping the palace, identifying loyalists and potential allies within Alba Longa. They discovered that Amulius's rule, while secure through force, was deeply unpopular. The citizens remembered the just reign of Numitor and chafed under the tyranny of his brother. Many of the old nobility remained loyal to the rightful king, waiting for an opportunity to restore him to power. The twins divided their forces strategically. Romulus would lead the external assault, gathering the young shepherds and hillfolk who had followed them for years. These men, hardened by life in the wilderness and united by their loyalty to the twins, would form the backbone of their army. Meanwhile, Remus would infiltrate the city, making contact with the underground resistance and preparing for an uprising from within. His natural charisma and royal bearing would convince even the most skeptical that the rightful heirs had returned. The attack came at dawn on the festival of Robigalia, when the city's defenses were relaxed and many of the soldiers were drunk from the previous night's celebrations. It was a calculated choice. The festival honored the god who protected crops from blight, and the twins saw it as a favorable omen for their cause. Romulus struck first, leading his hill fighters in a charge against the main gate. They moved like wolves, swift and silent, overwhelming the guards before they could raise an alarm. The sound of their battle cry echoed through the streets as they poured into the city. For Numitor, for justice. At the same moment, Remus emerged from the shadows within the palace, leading a group of conspirators who had been waiting years for this moment. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, neutralizing guards and opening passages for their allies. Amulius was roused from his bed by the sound of battle, but it was too late. His guards were dead or fled, his palace was overrun, and the ghosts of his past had come to claim their due. When the twins burst into his bedchamber, Amulius found himself staring into the faces of the nephews he thought he had killed 18 years before. The resemblance to their grandfather was unmistakable, but there was something else in their eyes, something wild and dangerous inherited from their divine father. "Uncle," Romulus said, his voice carrying the authority of a natural ruler, "your debt is due." Amulius, for all his cruelty, was no coward. He reached for his sword, but age and soft living had made him slow. Remus was faster, his blade finding the usurper's heart before the tyrant could draw steel. The usurper's scream echoed through Alba Longa as justice finally came home. With his death, the reign of terror that had lasted 4 decades came to an end. The palace that had been built on blood and betrayal was finally cleansed. Numitor was restored to his rightful throne amid scenes of wild celebration. The people danced in the streets, threw flowers from their windows, and chanted the names of the twins who had delivered them from tyranny. The old king wept openly as he embraced his grandsons, the heirs he had thought lost forever. The twins could have claimed the crown for themselves. They were young, strong, beloved by the people, and had proven their right through conquest. But they had tasted something greater than inherited power during their years in the wilderness. They had tasted the thrill of building something new, of creating rather than merely inheriting. The hills where they had grown up, the river that had saved them, the sacred places where they had learned their strength, these called to them more strongly than any throne. "Let us found our own city," Romulus declared, his eyes bright with vision. "At the place where the she-wolf saved us, where the gods showed us our destiny." It seemed like fate itself was calling them home to the 7 hills beside the Tiber. Chapter 8. When Brothers Become Strangers. The return to the sacred hills should have been a moment of pure triumph. The twins stood on the heights above the Tiber, looking out over the landscape that had shaped them, with the power to build something that would last forever. They could see it all in their minds, a great city rising from the wilderness, with stone walls and marble temples, busy markets and forums where citizens would gather to debate and decide their fate. It would be a city of refuge, welcoming outcasts and exiles, a place where merit mattered more than birth. But as they stood looking across the 7 hills, the brothers faced their first real disagreement, and it would prove to be their last. Remus favored the Aventine Hill, with its commanding view of the river and the trade routes that would bring wealth to their city. From its heights, he argued, they could see enemies approaching from any direction and control the flow of commerce that would make their city prosperous. Romulus preferred the Palatine Hill, where they had been found by their wolf mother, where the cave of their salvation yawned like a mouth in the rock. This was sacred ground, he insisted, blessed by the gods and destined to be the heart of their new realm. For the first time in their lives, the twins found themselves on opposite sides of an argument that mattered. They had disagreed on small things before. Which path to take through the woods, which girl was prettier at a village festival, who could run faster or jump higher. But this was different. This was about their legacy, their future, their claim to immortality. "We must consult the gods," they agreed, falling back on the ancient art of augury, reading the will of heaven through the flight of birds. It was a practice as old as civilization itself, a way of letting the divine powers choose when mortal minds could not agree. Remus climbed to the summit of the Aventine Hill, accompanied by a small group of his most loyal followers. He built a simple altar of stacked stones and offered wine and incense to the gods, asking them to show their will through the sacred signs. Romulus took his position on the Palatine Hill, creating his own altar at the very spot where the she-wolf had first found them. The brothers, who had never been separated for more than an hour in their lives, now stood on opposite hills, watching the sky with desperate intensity. The morning passed in tense silence. Both groups scanned the heavens for the sacred birds, whose flight would reveal the divine will. The sun climbed higher, and still no sign appeared. Then, at midday, 6 great vultures circled over the Aventine Hill. Remus's followers cheered in triumph. Surely this was the sign they had been waiting for. The gods had chosen the Aventine, and their leader would be the founder of the new city. But the celebration was premature. As the afternoon wore on, the sky above the Palatine Hill darkened with the wings of not 6, but 12 massive vultures. They circled lower and lower, their harsh cries echoing across the hills like the voices of the gods themselves. Both brothers claimed victory. Remus pointed to the priority of his sighting. He had seen the sacred birds first, which should give him precedence. Romulus countered with the superiority of his numbers. 12 vultures surely outweighed 6, regardless of timing. Their followers took up the argument. voices rising in anger as each side insisted their interpretation was correct. The bonds of brotherhood, tested by the weight of destiny, began to strain and crack. Both brothers believed the gods had chosen them. Both felt the burning certainty of divine favor. And for the first time in their lives, Romulus and Remus could not agree. The die was cast. The brothers' love was about to be tested by something more powerful than Bloodmund, more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced, pride. Chapter 9. The Sacred Line That Could Not Be Crossed. Unable to resolve their dispute through augury, the twins made a decision that would haunt history. They agreed to go their separate ways, temporarily, they told themselves. Each would build a city on his chosen hill, and whoever created the better settlement would be acknowledged as the true founder. It was meant to be a friendly contest, a way to let their actions speak louder than their arguments. But competitiveness had always been part of their nature, and now it was fueled by something deeper than mere sibling rivalry. It was driven by destiny itself. Day and night, Romulus worked with desperate energy on the Palatine Hill. He laid out streets with military precision, creating a grid pattern that would become the model for Roman cities throughout the empire. He organized his followers into the First Senate, a council of 100 men who would help govern the new settlement. He established laws based on justice and merit, rituals that would bind his people together, customs that would distinguish them from other tribes. Every decision was made with the future in mind, every structure built to last for generations. But most importantly, he began to build a wall, not just any wall, a sacred boundary, a pomerium, blessed by the gods and protected by divine law. He traced its outline with a bronze plow pulled by a white bull and a white cow, the furrow marking the mystical separation between the city and the outside world. This wasn't merely a defensive fortification. It was a religious barrier, a line between civilization and wilderness, between the sacred and the profane. To cross this boundary without permission was to violate the most fundamental law of the new city, to invite the wrath of heaven itself. Every stone was placed with ritual precision. Every gate was consecrated with offerings to the gods. The wall rose slowly but steadily, each day making the new city more real, more permanent, more unassailable. But the wall was still low, still incomplete, when Remus came to visit. Perhaps he came to make peace, to see if they could still find a way to rule together. Perhaps he came to scout his brother's progress, to see if he needed to work harder on his own city. Perhaps he simply came out of curiosity to see what his twin had built. What he found was a wall that barely reached his knees, more symbolic than functional, impressive in its sacred meaning, but laughably inadequate as a defense. After months of work, after all the grand proclamations about divine favor and eternal glory, this was what his brother had to show. When Remus saw the wall, he couldn't help himself. He laughed, not from cruelty, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. The sound of his mocking laughter carried across the construction site, causing workers to look up from their labor and senators to pause in their deliberations. And then, perhaps to make his point more dramatically, perhaps simply acting on impulse, Remus did the unthinkable. He placed his hands on the low stones and vaulted over the wall with the athletic grace that had made him famous among the hill folk. His voice rang out with scornful amusement as he landed on the other side. "Behold how easily your mighty fortress falls to a single man. What protection can such walls offer against true enemies?" The workers stopped their labor. The senators ceased their deliberations. The entire construction site fell silent as every eye turned to see how Romulus would respond to this ultimate challenge to his authority. Romulus felt something dark and terrible rise within him. Not just anger, but something primal, divine, inherited from Mars himself. His hand moved to his sword without conscious thought, his body responding to an instinct deeper than reason. Chapter 10. the price paid in blood and tears. As Remus fell, the sky darkened with unnatural clouds that blotted out the sun. Thunder rolled across the hills without any sign of approaching rain, and the earth itself seemed to tremble with the weight of what had just occurred. The twins, who had shared a womb, shared a wolf's milk, shared every adventure and triumph for 18 years, would never share another moment. The brother who had been Romulus's other half, his closest friend, his partner in every endeavor, lay still and silent in the dust. Romulus dropped his bloody sword and fell to his knees beside his brother's body. For a moment, the divine wrath that had driven him to murder faded, and he was just a young man who had killed the person he loved most in the world. He cradled Remus's head in his lap, his tears mixing with the blood that stained the sacred ground. "What have I done?" he whispered to the darkening sky. "What have I become?" The senators and workers stood in stunned silence, watching their leader mourn. Some wept openly, remembering the jokes and stories Remus had shared, the way he had always been the more approachable of the twins. Others looked on with hardened eyes, understanding that this was the price of greatness, that empires are built on sacrifice, and even the most precious things must sometimes be destroyed. But there was no taking it back. The price of Rome had been paid in brotherly blood, and Romulus had learned the hardest lesson of leadership. Sometimes, to build something great, you must destroy something precious. In the days that followed, as the shock of the tragedy faded, the work continued. The wall rose higher, strengthened by the blood that had consecrated it. The city grew more magnificent, as if the gods themselves were pouring their favor into the project. From that tragedy, Rome was born. Romulus gave his name to the eternal city, established its laws, and opened its gates to welcome outcasts and fugitives from across the ancient world. The city became a beacon of hope for the dispossessed, a place where anyone could find a new start. But the city needed women to survive and grow. When the neighboring tribes refused to give their daughters in marriage to a settlement founded by murderers and exiles, Romulus conceived a plan that would be remembered for millennia. He invited all the surrounding communities to a great festival in honor of Neptune, promising games, races, and feasting. The Sabines came in great numbers, bringing their wives and daughters to enjoy the celebration. At a prearranged signal, the Roman men seized the Sabine women and carried them off to become their wives. What followed was war, a brutal conflict that raged for years, as the Sabines sought to recover their daughters and punish the Romans for their treachery. The war finally ended when the Sabine women themselves intervened, throwing themselves between their fathers and their husbands on the battlefield. "If you must spill blood," they cried, "let it be ours, for we are daughters to some of you and wives to others. Do not make us widows and orphans in a single day." The peace that followed brought prosperity and growth. Romulus ruled for 37 years, watching his city grow from a collection of huts on a hill into a power that commanded respect throughout central Italy. He established the foundations of what would become the Roman Empire, the Senate, the legions, the legal system, the religious traditions that would endure for 1,000 years. And when his time came to die, Romulus did not perish like ordinary men. During a terrible thunderstorm, as he reviewed his troops at the Campus Martius, he vanished into the heavens, transformed by the gods into Quirinus, the divine protector of Rome. Some claimed to have seen him ascend in a chariot of fire, while others whispered that the senators had murdered him and hidden his body. But the people chose to believe in his apotheosis, and Romulus joined the ranks of the gods who watched over the city he had founded. Epilogue: the eternal questions. Some say that on quiet nights, when the wind softly moves across the 7 hills, you can still hear 2 voices, Romulus calling across the centuries to his lost brother, and Remus answering from the shadows, forever watching over the city they once dreamed to share. The she-wolf's gentle howl still echoes in the Lupercal cave, a tender lament for the cubs she raised, who faced challenges that shaped their destinies. The fig tree still grows where the basket came to rest, its roots deeply drinking from the same earth that witnessed the beginning of their story. In the forum rising above the Palatine Hill stands a statue showing the twins as infants, nursing from their wolf mother. It reminds every Roman of their city's origin, not in sterile perfection, but in the beautiful and intricate reality of human nature. The story of Romulus and Remus is more than a founding myth. It is a reflection on the costs of greatness, the delicate balance of power, and the enduring tension between love and ambition that propels human civilization forward. It invites us to ask, what are we willing to give for our dreams? How far will we go to leave a lasting legacy? Can greatness be built without sacrifice? Is it possible to change the world while honoring what is precious? From that first moment, Rome grew to become one of the most extraordinary civilizations in history. Its influences stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara. Roman law formed the bedrock of Western justice. Its engineering marvels still inspire admiration. The Latin language blossomed into many tongues spoken today. Yet Rome never forgot the lesson of its origins, that power and responsibility are intertwined, that the line between order and chaos is thin, and that every achievement carries the weight of choices made. The she-wolf who cared for the twins became Rome's eternal symbol, appearing on coins, standards, and monuments throughout the empire. She reminds us all that we carry within us both the wild and the civilized, that compassion and challenge, unity and struggle, exist side by side in the human spirit. This myth teaches that sometimes the greatest human achievements arise not from simplicity, but from the rich and complex truth of who we are, capable of profound love and deep struggle, often intertwined. Romulus and Remus, who dreamed of ruling side by side, gave us a story that endures, a testament that history is shaped not by flawless heroes, but by imperfect people reaching for greatness and facing the cost with courage. Perhaps the most lasting philosophy is this: the future belongs to those brave enough to act, wise enough to dream, and strong enough to carry the consequences, even when their hearts feel the weight. The twins shared everything but a crown. The brothers who faced fate together learned that pride and unity are delicate. And the city they built, that city has endured through time. But was it worth? The true